Another important part of fractions is understanding what common denominators are. Now remembering that we have a numerator, the bar, and then the denominator is very important for this because we're always looking at the bottom number. If we're looking at 3 over 5, we're looking at the 5 if we're talking about the denominator. So before we can consider common denominators, we need to understand how we can change denominators in a single fraction by creating equivalent fractions. Now if we look at this, we have create 3 equivalent fractions for the following. We have 1/2 to begin with. Well, we know that 1/2 is about 50% of something, or exactly 50%. 50% means 50 out of 100. Another equivalent fraction would be 2 over 4. 2 is half of 4. So kind of looking at this, if we looked at that, we did 1 times 2 gave us 2, and 2 times 2 gave us 4. So we're just multiplying the top and the bottom by the same thing. So if I take both these numbers and multiply them by 10, we'd get 20 over 40, and that's also the same as 1/2. Now looking at a quarter, we're going to have 25%, or 25 out of 100. If we do our multiplying by 2 trick, we get 2. 1 times 2 is 2. 4 times 2 would be 8, so we'd get 2 over 8. And now this time I'm going to actually multiply the 1 and the 4 by 10, multiplying them by the same number again. I get 10 over 40. So all of these are equivalent to 1/4. All of these are equivalent to 1/2. A common denominator is when we have multiple different fractions that share the same denominator. Now this is useful for adding, subtracting, and comparing fractions. There's multiple different ways to find common denominators, and we're going to examine that here. So starting by multiplying the current denominators together. So if we have 2 fractions, we can take both of those denominators, multiply them together, and we'll get a common denominator. So the first question says, find a common denominator between the following fraction pairs and rewrite the fractions with that denominator. So if we multiply these together, our common denominator is going to be 15. 5 times 3 is 15. But when we're looking at this, whatever we do to the bottom to get our common denominator, we need to do to the top of that same fraction. So we had to do 5 times 3, so on the top of this fraction we had to do 4 times 3. Now don't confuse that with the second fraction, which is slightly different. The second fraction we had to do 3 times 5, so here on the top we had to do 5 times 5, because whatever we do to the bottom of the fraction, we have to do the same to the top. So for this first fraction we get 12 over 15, and the second fraction we get 25 over 15. Now the second question, we'd do 4 times 1, we'd get 4. So 4 times 1 is not going to change anything. 2 times 1, we're going to still do the same to the top and the bottom. Now in the second fraction, we had to multiply 1 by 4. So on the top, we need to do the same thing, multiply 3 by 4. So the first fraction is actually going to stay the same. It's going to be 2 over 4. But the second fraction is going to change to 12 over 4. We're going to do the same thing again for this last one, 7 times 2. We're going to get 14 as our common denominator. Now, when I do 7 times 2, I've got to do the same to the top. So I do 2 times 2. And over here, I'm going to do 2 times 7. So I've got to do the same to the top again. I'm going to get 5 times 7. So on the bottom, in both cases here, I get 14. And on the top, we've changed this to 4 over 14. And changed this fraction to 35 over 14. So that's the first way to get a common denominator. Just multiply the 2 denominators that you're dealing with together. The second thing we're going to look at is finding a common denominator or a multiple between the denominators already given. So if I look at this first example, I know that 6 is actually a multiple of 3. If I multiply 3 times 2, I get 6. So I don't have to change my second fraction. It's going to stay the same. But what I have here is I multiply 3 times 2 to get my 6. I have to do the same thing to the top, so I'm going to do 4 times 2. I'm going to get 4 over 6 over here, and this stays as 2 over 6. We actually have the same thing here. 6 is a multiple of 2. So we're going to look, our common denominator is 6. 3 times 2 gives us 6. So our 3 over 6 doesn't change. it's going to stay as 3 over 6, but our first fraction, we're going to do 2 times 3, so I've got to do 1 times 3, so we're going to get 3 over 6. Now the final one's a little bit harder. Now with this one, I know that 24 is a multiple of 6 and 18. 6 times 4 gives me 24, and 8 times 3 gives me 24. That one was a little tougher because these numbers, the multiple was already in the denominator. This one you kind of had to figure it out on your own. So here, I did 6 times 4. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So 5 times 4. So I'm going to get 20 over 24. The second fraction, I've got 8 times 3, so I've got to do 5 times 3. So I'm going to get 15 over 24. Go ahead and give the questions associated with this note a try.